Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar, Real-World Intelligent Environments, Energy Management, and Digital Technologies at JPMorgan Chase. Current powered by GE is happy to have JPMorgan Chase hosting this webinar with us, and we will have two presenters today, Bruce Stewart, Chief Marketing Officer at Current powered by GE, and Mike Norton, Managing Director, Global Real Estate at JPMorgan Chase. So first, for a little bit of information about each speaker, Bruce Stewart is Chief Marketing Officer at Current powered by GE, where he elevates Current's product portfolio, which includes advanced energy technologies like LED and solar embedded with network sensors and software to make commercial buildings and industrial facilities more energy efficient and productive. Before joining Current, Bruce created an energy services enterprise that grew from a startup into a multi-billion-dollar business. We're also happy to have Mike Norton, Managing Director, Global Real Estate at JPMorgan Chase, where he's responsible for managing the firm's property and facilities management activities, with over 7,400 properties worldwide. Before joining JPMorgan Chase, Mike was the global head of property management and operations for Tishman Speyer, one of the leading owners, developers, and operators of first-class real estate in the world. Under his leadership, the firm became one of the top-tier operators globally. Prior to that, he held numerous assignments over a 30-year care and air command and control. So before I turn it over to Bruce and Mike to talk about the deployment of an intelligent environment at JPMorgan Chase, I just would like to tell everyone that anyone could submit questions during the presentation in the webinar chat box. We will also hold a Q&A session at the end of the webinar for about the last 10 to 15 minutes. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for getting us kicked off here, Stacy. This is Bruce Stewart. You'll recognize my voice, and shortly you'll recognize Mike's as well. Thank you all for joining. First and foremost, I appreciate your interest in learning a little bit more about the partnership between GE Current and JPMorgan Chase. Mike and I are excited to have a chance to talk with you, share some additional details, and frankly, and help all of you as you're on your own individual journeys about delivering an intelligent environment, to give you some education about what we found along the way, what our motivation factors were, how do we define this intelligent environment, right? What are the clear sort of benefits and outcomes? What were our real drivers for partnering with one another? And then hopefully that will motivate all of you on the phone to sort of step into that journey and either reach out to us about how that might be applicable for your businesses. So first and foremost, how do we start here? I'm going to start a little bit at a little higher level around intelligent environments and sort of some of the origin for the mission that we're on. And it really starts from the standpoint as you look, it's amazing. If we think back 5 to 10 years ago, the incredible influx of devices that are increasingly connected to the internet. Now, we know this all on a very personal level, how so many things such as our phones, right, clearly all sorts of iPads and tablets and all the rest. You're even seeing clothing now. Clearly our cars and vehicles. You're starting to see lots of city infrastructure is increasingly connected. You're seeing traffic elements being connected. And increasingly, you're also seeing the capability of technology and the improvements in technology. The reduction in the cost of that technology is allowing additional things to get connected to the internet. It's called IoT. We all often think about that, but in the context of buildings, right? And clearly in greater degree in the context of cities. And that's an awesome opportunity for us to, once connected, it's not just about knowing and the data about what's happening there, but most importantly, it's really about how do you actually understand what's happening, right, because you're now connected, and how could you fundamentally improve both the operating performance of those machines, of those assets and those buildings in order to drive some great outcomes. And so if you'll flip to the next slide, that's really where we're sort of betting in. We're betting into this notion of creating intelligent buildings and intelligent cities that strive to do two really important things. Right? And I think you'll find both of these important things, as Mike talks, will be very simpatico with the goals that they have. One is driving energy efficiency, right? Driving greenhouse gas, emissions down, right? Driving cost out of the business, driving waste out, and just running our facilities from an energy efficiency standpoint in a far more sustainable way. Some folks are starting that journey to net zero. Others are really accelerating, putting their foot on the pedal to drive there. The other side, increasingly, is how do I make both our buildings and our cities, right? Because we're focused on intelligent buildings and cities, more productive, more business productivity. How do we actually improve the way that those buildings, whether they're retail, industrial, manufacturing, or warehouses, or office buildings, work better, perform better, deliver better customer experience, better employee experiences? So that's really where we're thinking about this. And so we've sort of said to ourselves, it's really important as you look at this slide now to think about how do you get the data and information necessary, right, to fundamentally optimize and create an intelligent environment. First, there is an edge. There's an infrastructure at the edge that actually can drive that energy efficiency, both from the standpoint of LED retrofits. From an industry-wide standpoint, there have been a lot of significant milestones that companies have made, that businesses have made, and even consumer households have made to sort of convert to more energy-efficient LED lighting. Other folks have sort of looked at solar as another way to sort of look at driving additional sort of efficiencies or sustainability solutions. We think a really magical combination is the opportunity to think about at that time in buildings, for instance, or even in cities, when you're thinking about an LED retrofit, to look at that as a terrific opportunity to bring in the capability to connect those facilities. And you can do that through wireless sensor technologies, right? Again, that's the notion of technology has come down over time to deliver the marriage of, at the same time that you're in your ceiling, also add additional capabilities that can sense what's going on in the environment and, importantly, control what's going on in that environment, right? So sort of once you understand it, that center box, sort of that digital industrial, talks to the notion of truly understanding across a whole portfolio of assets. Yes, you can do it in one location, but many of our customers are very interested in doing it over hundreds, even thousands of locations. And what are they interested in doing? How can you help me understand what's happening in that environment to drive better energy management solutions, which make it run more optimally and less wastefully and drive costs out? How can I do smart controls that let me sort of change something so I see an opportunity to optimize, and then I'll fundamentally have a control that does that? And it rides on the back of Predix, which I'll talk a little bit more at the end. And the other thing is, how can we combine financing models, right? This stuff is expensive, and there's a lot of competition for the capital dollar to invest in facilities. And how can we, working with our GE sort of financing arm, which is part and parcel of Current in this particular instance, help finance and drive sort of that immediate operational savings and benefit while also helping support sort of the capital required to sort of deploy these across multiple buildings or cities. So that's the real sort of notion here. Let's take a jump to the next slide. So sometimes I often in these conversations begin, is it moving forward? 1 second here. There we go. So the next thing is, people often ask the question, so how do you actually define an intelligent environment? And you sort of think about it from, if you almost think about it from a very human perspective, right? In order to have intelligence, you need to sort of have a sense of what's going on around you, sort of that see, hear, right? Tangible sense of really what's happening in an environment. The next thing is you have to have the brain that could sort of process that information and then make decisions and analyze it, and then ultimately you sort of have to have the arm, if you will, the arms and the legs that sort of execute on the commands that you intellectually have sort of processed. That's kind of the way to think about it here. On the left-hand side, you need, at the end of the day, the ability to sense and be aware of what's happening. sort of an LED and a rich sensor network that captures key information from, of course, the temperature elements, right? There were daylight components. Is it dim or dark? We're all sort of familiar with this stuff. Humidity, CO2, but also interesting the way buildings are being used, the way assets are moving in and around them, the way people are moving in and around them. Is it truly optimal for the purpose, right? Is it working the best way it can? Are there opportunities to improve the way we inhabit and the workflow processes? The answer is absolutely. We take that, then you need to actually communicate that to the brain. So that's sort of this edge network. At the same time you've done the LED retrofit, it's a perfect time to put the sensors in, and then those will connect with a gateway. That gateway is sort of that, call it that connective nervous system that's bringing it up to the brain ultimately, which is sort of the current digital engine that's running on the back of a very hardy Predix environment. And at that point, that's what we call this sort of this digital engine, these analytics to deliver insights and recommendations out that ultimately then get put to use in actual applications that will use that. So we have applications called All Sites. You'll hear a little bit about it. That's our ability to sort of optimize the energy management components inside of facilities. And then we also have, really importantly, a whole set of partners that we have brought in that in each of your unique cases can help be deployed to deliver outcomes that we've sort of outlined here. Do you want to know a little bit more about the space utilization, right? And or are you worried that you have too little, you have too much, or are you worried that you have underutilized locations? You have a lot of capital dollars pressing against, the sense we're busting at the seams, we need more real estate. Well, let's actually really find out, are we effectively fully utilizing? And that's an awesome use case that we've seen time and time again. We've seen in our open office environments, and increasingly we're all building that meeting room management is a real challenge. So we have partners to do that. We think in retail locations, there's opportunities for queue management, for wayfinding, to find your way in and around corporate campuses, and around large complexes, buildings, or in and around retail stores, right? There's all sorts of elements around employee satisfaction, business improvement, and site efficiency. There's plenty here, and there's plenty more for to learn about. I just want to give you a sample. That's how we're sort of thinking about that intelligent environment, that it's a full completion from sensing to understanding, analyzing, driving insights, and then driving true controls to do something really about it to affect the change. So on the next slide is a bit of and I'll probably make one particular point here for those who sort of like a little bit more of a, let's call it an architectural graphic. The idea is that at the customer premise, you have a sensor network, right, that aggregates that. We talked a little bit about that. That can be both wireless and wired, right? Oftentimes both are required. And you're pulling in data from the LEDs, you're pulling in HVAC, a whole bunch of other atmospheric and environmental solutions. We have that digital engine there. And then we have our All Sites energy management application, and then all of our partner applications, and delivering those two outcomes that we talked about. Energy efficiency, right? They both help your P&L. One's driving towards cost out, and one's driving towards business growth and revenue growth. And really important is this concept of open at the bottom and open at the top, right? This isn't proprietary. It's not intended to be proprietary. It's intended to allow you to plug and play applications that are most relevant, and you'll see this in the context of Chase, that are most relevant to them for their building types, right? And they have a whole suite of variety of building types, as you'll hear Mike talk about. That's really important, right? So the applications that can ride on top of our Intelligent Environments platform give you that flexibility, and it gives you flexibility to have it be additive. So when you have that sensor network in there, you can, over time, continue to utilize that same sensor network to add additional application capability to drive additional improvements. Also important, to the extent that there are additional sensors in place, we're agnostic from that standpoint too. We're saying we're open at the bottom to collect a variety of different information from building management systems, from existing, compatible sensors, and so forth. The idea is that ingestion side is just as important. So with that, I'll pause, and I think we're going to turn. Now you've got hopefully a little bit of a primer on intelligent environments. You guys are ready to go, at least as we've defined intelligent environments. And Mike, I'll pass the baton to you.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Just a few clarifications. For the 298 people that are now on and listening, if you heard the beginning in my bio, it probably sounded a little bit weird that I care for air defense stuff for the last 30 years. So what it did leave out was that I spent 30 years in the Marines. So I retired in August. I was in the reserves for 21 years. I did 9 years active, or something like that. I don't really know the math, but so that's the miscue in my bio. But I would like to thank now the 302 people that are online and listening to this WebEx today. And thanks to our partners at GE for hosting and putting this together. It's been a terrific run so far, and we couldn't be happier. We're really thrilled to be with these guys and on this journey, because we really are the tip of the spear, and we're doing really cool things together. And I'll give you a little insight. This all started just about 2 years ago, where I was having coffee with the folks from GE in our headquarters building in New York. And I was new to the job and new to the role, and I had traveled around the globe a little bit and had started to notice and recognize some of the deficient, properties that we had from a sustainability, standpoint. And GE said, we'd like to do a pilot program with you and probably do a few sites and test them out, install some LED lighting. And I didn't waste much time, and I said, why don't you give me a proposal to do all 5,500 branches with an LED upgrade, and I'd like to do that in under 1 year if possible, and come back in a week with that proposal and show me how it affects my shareholder value. And there was a little bit of shock and awe, and a week later they came back and they had the numbers. And probably 6 months later, we signed our first deal for $168 million in LED lighting, the largest single-source LED lighting deal ever done that we know of. So we're off, and we've got about 3,000 of these branches already retrofitted. And then that led to other things, which really our goal for JPMorgan is to be 100% carbon neutral by 2020. It's aggressive, as you might think, in the next 3 years, but we have a process of in looking at this with LEDs, BMS systems, which we're going to talk about inside our retail branches and our commercial, on-site solar deployment, on-site fuel cell deployment, and then we completed our first purchase and power agreement last year in Texas with a company called NRG. So with those 4 or 5 variables, we feel pretty confident that with GE and the backing that we have so far, we're going to hit this goal of 100% carbon neutrality. And in the end, there might be some RECs we have to buy to make up for a little percentage point or here or there, but we're really looking forward to it. So if you go to the next slide. We also, in addition to what we just discussed as far as the 4 or 5 factors with LEDs and on-site solar, et cetera, our investment banking side has committed over the next 10 years a $200 billion commitment to our clients to facilitate new energy and transportation, waste management, water treatment, et cetera. So we're excited to be partners from the banking standpoint as well. And part of this sort of, this angle for JPMorgan was we are out there advising our clients on renewable energy sector. We're underwriting debt and promoting investments in sustainability. We really should practice what we're out there preaching. And therefore, with that combination of going out and chasing this kind of financing, we thought we can't be a big brown bank. We have to be renewable. And that was hence kind of putting this whole program into place. So just to put a little flavor around that. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And as I said earlier, right now we're just a little bit over 3,000 branches that we've retrofitted with the LEDs. You see the little slide where it says it's equivalent to taking about 27,000 cars off the road annually for 10 years. It's a pretty powerful thing. If you go to the next slide, you'll get a sense of sort of the things that we're looking at across holistically in the branches. So we did our LED deal, and then I said to Bruce and Mary Rose Sylvester and the rest of the gang, I have HVAC inside of these branches. I have now sprinkler systems inside of these branches, and we have 5,000 of them that these folks are out there every day, 20, 25-year managers in the branches, just turning on the heat and walking away at night and leaving it on, or leaving the lights on, or the cleaners come in after hours and leave the lights on, or the sprinklers just run continuously. We were getting fines by the state of California for, having water restrictions. So we talked to GE about what about putting in a brain, like a smart BMS technology system, and maybe something on the sprinkler side as well, so we can have more control over these things. And we can set up a cloud-based NOC, and we can then monitor this and be more proactive. So we see something on in the middle of the night, we can shut it down. We can pre-cool our buildings at 5 in the morning as opposed to having to leave the air conditioning on all night. We have branches in Texas, we have branches in Florida, we have branches in Phoenix. We're very hot markets where, the temperatures go up to over 100 degrees every day, and then at the end of the day, they don't really go down too low at night, so you couldn't really blame the managers for leaving the air conditioning on, but we wanted to be smart about it. So together we came up with this sort of like trifecta plan of, LEDs, BMS, and then the sprinklers, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. If you go to the next slide, how does this intelligent environment work? Go to the next slide. I think this is Bruce.
Yep. Well, you want me to cover that for 1 second? We go back. It'll be very quick, Mike, and then I'll let you jump right back in. I think we picked an image here that specifically, I think we got to go back one somehow. See if we can, yeah, there you go, right there. Give us a second. Thank you all. So we've obviously taken a screenshot of one of the many branches at Chase, and when you look at it, lots of folks say, like, geez, what is this going to look like, right, inside of a facility? How does it work, right? So I think, Mike, you could probably expound on this more, but Mike and the Chase team really took us to task and said, listen, we're operating a business that's running, persistently. We can't have one of our facilities sort of offline, and we want to make sure that you can sort of step up and deliver this kind of scale. And so there have been a lot of fairly rigorous, which I think is great, right? And I think the balance of the folks on the call should know that said, how do you do this in an overnight time frame, right, to avoid disruption at the local branch? How can you sort of set up, commission, install, and do all the quality control work, all at a time frame that sort of optimizes to try to avoid disruption and optimizes to make sure you're actually getting it done right the first time, so that you don't have to come back and revisit sites. So those are really key plays. The other thing is sort of aesthetically, some of these that are running retail sort of locations or any locations, you're looking for it. And the sensors themselves, as a practical matter, can be embedded in lights, or they can just be, accompanying, but they always need a power source. And so that's why when LED retrofits are happening, having the sensors in there to have a power source is one of the other sort of strategic elements of sort of how does it work. And that power source often helps. There may be a day where batteries could become, very reliable and long-term, and maybe sooner than we think. But the idea that it's also wireless allows for a lot less, infrastructure. Many of these were retrofits for Chase, and so the ability to come in and actually do it without dragging wires all the way through and causing a lot more disruption. One, again, is speed to installation, but also avoidance of disruption and frankly, reduce cost at the end of the day as well. And so then the next slide, I think we've actually covered this, so I think we actually probably can skip over this, but this is what I was talking about, which is the open at the top and making sure that we were providing our partners and our customers with the opportunity to select applications that are relevant for their spaces. And then lastly is when we're doing the brain, if you will, so Mike has got a whole lot of brain horsepower, and the whole Chase team does, because this is us sort of partnering with them on a big vision that they're driving. Well, part of the brain from a technical standpoint is riding on the back of this platform, and platforms that are consuming large volumes of data need to sort of ride on the top of a really strong software platform sort of built for the industrial internet. And Predix is GE's, industrial internet platform that is powering all of our sort of sister divisions as well, and their industrial internet initiatives, from GE Aviation to Power to the GE Digital team and so forth. So as you may or may not be aware, Kern is one of the 8 sort of business segments, and so this Predix is sort of the backbone for the industrial internet for the business. So got a really hardy platform. Next up. Next up is, and Mike, you mentioned this about, how do you think about moving beyond lighting and moving into sort of, building management or energy management solutions, and that's where AllSights comes in. And it's the principle is to help deliver the opportunity to truly understand what's happening, right, with HVAC systems. It can work with additional existing BMS solutions that may be in there from other companies, but the real importance is to be able to give you a full fleet-wide view, see which in this case bank branches are operating in a very efficient manner, which ones we have to really focus your attention on to sort of optimize, and then also levering in controls to put controls in place that will do simple stuff like lighting controls, but perhaps more detailed elements around HVAC controls, air movement issues, all of those other things that can really change the performance, as well as giving you sort of equipment-based, asset-based sort of information about how do you optimize the actual ongoing performance so that the machines themselves are running well, because well-running machines, well cared for, well-maintained, are by their very nature more energy efficient. And I think the next switch, so this is also being deployed through some of the Chase branches. We're running it through tens of them now, and then going to expand. And then also importantly is something that Mike referenced. And Mike, I'll pass the baton back to you so you can talk a little bit about the additional value on the water consumption side.
Yeah, so we're targeting really our biggest users and our bigger branches, and the water is obviously, it's a lot of restrictions out on the West Coast in California. They've had a lot of droughts over the last 10 years, and we found this product with GE, actually brought this to us, and we had a couple of these older models, but with this SmartLink technology, it's separate and standalone from the BMS that we're installing, and it's pretty cool technology where we tie this right into the weather channel. In the past, we didn't have that kind of capability. If we had a program, we would start watering, the grass and the trees in our different spots, even when it was raining. And right now, this is a pretty cool setup where we're linked in, it's tied into Weather Channel. It senses the rain. We have sensors on the roof decks, and we've only installed a few of them, sort of piloting it. But now we've underwritten for the rest of our portfolio. So in the end, we'll probably have between 500 and 1,000 of these in our key sites. It was just another way that, I would be on tours and show up on a beautiful sunny day, and sprinklers weren't running and grass looked dried up, and then I'd show up on a rainy day and the things would be running in the back parking lot. And so it's just getting more control, more rigor and governance around being disciplined on how we control the bank branch itself. And we don't want the bank managers thinking about this. We don't want them going into a closet inside the bank branch and figuring out when to turn on the sprinklers to water the flowers. And so part of it was like, let's be smart, let's put in the right technology, let them focus on banking. And so that's part of the partnership on this Weathermatic. So far, it's been really great. If you go to the next slide. Just take a second to talk a little bit about solar. I mentioned it earlier as part of our 2020 initiative. This is one of the buckets that we're focusing on heavily, not only on the retail side of our business, but we also have 1,000 commercial office buildings, and this is around 60 countries around the world. So in India and in London, and then across the United States, we're in deep discussions with, how do we look at this program and where does it tie into our incentives with the local utilities? How much can we take off grid? We're underwriting useful lives. We're looking at depreciation schedules. But we did start a pilot with GE in California and New Jersey, and we're putting solar plug and plays on top of about 40 branches right now. And it's still early go, but we're very optimistic that this is going to have a very big impact. Very low signature, easy plug and play on the roofs. But in the markets where we have big sun load, we are really optimistic this is going to be a great program for us, taking us off grid, et cetera. And again, this is also, it won't end on the solar. We're also looking at battery technology, and we're looking at small 10 to 20, 30, 40 kW units, which for fuel cells, which are gas powered, and they will be able to also take us off grid in times when we have hurricanes, like we just experienced down in Houston and in Florida. Cash was a big concern for many of the residents in those markets. As you saw on the news, or if you were in these markets when this happened, you know that a lot of people were looking for water and food and gasoline, and credit cards didn't work because there was no electricity. So cash is king, and we need to get people be able to go to our branches and get cash in these times. So we're looking at the resiliency factor as well as taking us off grid from a sustainability standpoint. So if you go to the next slide, the benefits and the results, and the next slide after that, I think, in short of repeating myself, I think you can see with the commitment that we both have as big corporate players, we're really excited about energy efficiency and creating this value across not only our retail side, but our commercial side as well. And this has all sort of happened in a really short 18-month span, and I think it's just going to continue, and we're hoping that others will follow suit. And go to the next slide. And this renewable energy capacity to the grid, I just talked about this, and again, with the combination of whether it's fuel or it's a fuel-in battery or it's a fuel battery and then a fuel cell battery and solar, all these components will give us the capacity to remove us from local utility grids. So in the event that we do have a hurricane or some kind of a failure or power outage, we're able to continue to conduct our business. And we're looking at it from a resiliency standpoint. But again, it's really a trifecta effect. It's good for our employees, it's great for our customers, and it's great for the environment because we're not putting those heavy demands during those 100-degree days when we're out in these different markets. And if you go to the next slide, we'll just talk a little bit briefly about the future of the workplace. This is one of our latest, newest branch ATMs, and they look like, a big IBM computer, but they can do about 60%, maybe a little bit more than what a traditional teller has done in the past, which really frees up more space inside of our banks so that our professional bankers can spend more time working on banking transactions and mortgages and investments for our customers. So we want people to be able to come in and go to this kind of technology, be in a cool space with LED lighting and nice air conditioning, and if they just want cash or they want to do some kind of a check transaction, this machine can do pretty much everything that sort of the tellers used to do, allowing us to give more time for our tellers to focus on the more advanced stuff in banking. And this is one of the areas that we're heading in. And you'll see these as you get out into the branches. We started to install these early last year. If you go to the next slide, I think ultimately in the end, it's not only about our retail, but partnering with GE, we're looking holistically across all of our real estate. And, the building of the future, as I've mentioned, we're looking at all the different technologies, whether it's the fuel cell technology to take us off grid with the gas, whether it's solar panels. We look at ice storage chiller plants where that makes sense and we have the footprint and the area to install these things. We can make ice at night and we can burn it during the day for our air conditioning needs. And again, taking our chillers offline, which again, take a big load off of the electrical grid. Obviously LED lighting and, upgrading our BMS systems. And then as Bruce talked about earlier, looking at populations of people and putting in sensors inside of these lights. And we just did a deal with GE and a new campus we built in Dallas And we're able to look at all of the sort of networks of folks on a day-to-day basis, how much time they spend in conference rooms, how much time they spend in pantries, how much time they spend in the open space. And we're tracking all of that data. And it's really about, the whole talk of choice seating or WeWork type space where we reduce the footprint of traditional 200 square feet per person down to 75 feet per person. This technology that GE is providing us is able to give us sort of an inside look on vacancy during the day inside of the buildings. So I think the future of our buildings, given this partnership and relationship that we've established, is really, really bright. I mean, it's just really cool to be putting in a light bulb that's going to last 10 years. And I don't have a ladder sitting in the lobby in the morning where somebody's changing out an old phosphorus light bulb, and then you look up and it doesn't match the one next to it. We're excited about creating a brand. It's great for our customers. Again, it's great for the employees. And it's certainly, first and foremost, great to be leading this effort with another big company because it's really great for the environment, and we really feel strongly about it. And I think that brings us to the last slide and probably open up for questions.
Yeah, but I think that's great, Mike. I mean, it takes it from a partnership, two partners with really equal passion. So thank you again for your sort of leadership and passion and for providing all the updates. There's lots more to learn. Before we jump into questions, I just want to let people know that we've got, you can visit Current by GE, our website, currentbyge.com. You can visit JPMorgan Chase. You can see customer stories about what we've done together. There's lots of content on social channels like Facebook. We have videos, YouTube. There's LinkedIn and Twitter content. There's several articles that have been written, sort of white paper sort of articles that can give you some really good data to sort of truly understand, and then think a little bit about how this may apply for your buildings and as you're driving towards your intelligent environments, intelligent buildings sort of initiative. So with that, thanks everybody for your time, and I guess we can open it up for questions. Is that right, Stacy? I'll turn it back to you.
Yep. So as a reminder, everyone on the call can submit any questions in the webinar chat box. So we have a number of questions that people have already submitted. The first one is for you, Mike. And the question is, why did you decide to make this investment with Current by GE?
That's a great question. So the question is, why do we decide to make this investment? So it's really about scale. And I'm really, I think it's good to do pilots and, learn from those mistakes early on. But frankly, there's not a lot of folks out there that can provide this kind of scale and depth and speed to market to deliver sort of what we were looking for. We have a very aggressive game plan, and that was sort of right from the beginning the foundation of this whole thing. But we didn't want to do one-offs and do one market at a time and see how it goes. We really believe in the product. We believe in what this thing's going to deliver, and the faster to market we can go and deliver, the faster the trifecta goes into effect. It goes back to, we're going to rebrand our branches so there's a consistency, and we have that same look and feel for our customers, and that's really, sort of like, if I use the analogy, if you go to a Ritz-Carlton, whether it's California or New York or Shanghai or London, you go into that hotel and it has that same feel and look, and the customer service is terrific, and the bed is the same, and the pillows are fluffy, and we kind of wanted to have that same branding, but we wanted to get to that spot quick, or in that time frame. And GE was the one that really stepped up. And we did look at other players. We did go out to bid on a couple of other aspects. But at the end of the day, we were able to, come to really good terms, and that's really the answer to it. It's about scale for us and doing the right thing and not lag behind anymore.
Great. Thank you, Mike. So our next question, I believe, is for Bruce, and the question is, with so much vulnerability these days due to cyber attacks, how do you rationalize with a customer that connecting more platforms to the internet is safe for their business?
Right. This is probably a question for Mike, for both Mike and I, because we've had a fair bit of work done by IT, if you will, teams on both sides of the equation to make sure that we were managing all sorts of cyber and data integrity and resiliency and risks and issues. And so Predix at the end of the day is powering power plants and helping drive sort of optimization for aircraft engines. And so it has been built as an industrial internet sort of platform with a premium on making sure that it was safe and secure. And likewise, you also can look at the way you're setting up your networks, right, to sort of run as well, and you're making sure that there's a whole sort of quantification certification process to make sure that as we're rolling networks out that we're indeed managing risk and creating all the appropriate sort of blocks, firewalls, and so forth to prevent any kind of cyber issues. And that's going to be premium to us, of course, but clearly premium to Mike and for all their banking infrastructure. So, Mike, I'll pass it to you to sort of complement that same sort of managing that same concern.
JPMorgan has 50,000 technologists today out of a company of 250,000 people roughly. We spend a tremendous amount of time on building the engines and the infrastructure and the governance around protecting the customers and employees, et cetera, across the globe. We take it very seriously. We create, we spend an inordinate amount of time on this, and Bruce already kind of alluded to it. This wasn't like a plug and play that we were able to just sign a contract with GE and then, without our GTI guys and our cyber guys and our whole team, putting months and months of research and trials into how we're going to actually put these things into the branches, off network, off GPMC's live network, customer data is not going to be breached, et cetera, et cetera. So we exhaust this here. It's something that is probably the most important thing we do at JPMorgan, given that the environment that we're all in today, whether it's us or GE or any other firm, we're all vulnerable, and it's a scary thing, and you got to hope that you have that right protection. So we did not take it lightly, and we are over the hump, and we are putting these things in, and we passed all the tests. But they continue to try to break in and check it, and from time to time, and they come back and say you just passed, and that's across all my systems. It isn't only with the deals we're doing at GE. They do this across all of our systems throughout operations in our buildings across the globe.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Next question. Does the SmartLine Weathermatic system operate through the Predix solution, or is it totally separate? Probably for you, Bruce.
Yeah, I think it's running through the platform, but it is operating as sort of an application on running through and using sort of all the sensor based technology and the connection points. So,
next question is for you, Mike. And the question is, what has the response been from JPMorgan Chase leaders and employees about these updates and the firm's sustainability commitment?
We've announced, I think, a couple of months ago, I'm not really sure, it was like right towards the end of the summer, early fall, and I think Bruce just said at the end of the presentation, there's so many great articles and points that have been sort of put out there across many different channels. I think it's very, very positive from the senior leadership, from Jamie Dimon and the operating committee all the way down. We are updating them on a quarterly basis on our progress for all of these programs. They couldn't be more thrilled with the feedback. We compete just like every other major firm competes for this thing we call millennials. And these folks that are getting out of college today are young and bright and talented, and they have choices. They can go to Google or Microsoft or Yahoo or Amazon or Nike And we want to be in that same circle. We want to be able to attract that same talent, and that's part of one of this, our big commitments. Let's not fool ourselves. It's very important for this generation that you're practicing good measures for the environment, for the planet, and they look at that and they research it, and they have options now. So we couldn't be more excited about really where we sit today and what our vision is. And I can't say enough about it. There's probably, many, many articles that have been written so far, and I think Jamie was quoted in the Wall Street Journal, and this all was released, and that's kind of where we're at. And it's still early stages, but we feel we're right on the right track for this journey.
Great. Thank you, Mike. The next question, and we've actually had a few questions around this. The next question is for you, Bruce, is does the GE solution provide access and control to all the components? There were a couple related questions, people wanting to know a little bit more about the softwares and controls piece.
Yeah, you bet. So they're probably, my assumption is the question sort of referring to some of the all sites capabilities, right? So all sites at once does what we call sort of the insights function, which is an aggregation of rich data about what's actually happening from the various energy components. So from that perspective, it can run through, a JSON box and it can tap into and get access to additional building management solutions. So to give you all of that same capability that's there, it can sort of pull. It also has the ability through some more traditional things to also understand and have access to what's going on in the environment from, as we said, from temperature. It will consume that, from light and from dimming, and then it will actually execute both lighting controls and HVAC controls, both components. And so as we're sort of evolving and building it, we're feeling really strong on some of the control capabilities for lighting today. And for HVAC, thermostatic, and other base controls. And we're continuing to build a richer control package in as we continue to evolve the software that will go and avail itself of some of the additional control aspects that are in existing components and or could be add-ons.
Okay. Great. Mike, the next question is for you, and the question is, what difference do these updates make for Chase customers? Again, I used the analogy earlier.
When you go to a Ritz-Carlton, you know what you're kind of getting. We're trying to create a brand awareness that, we have all these Chase signs. That's our brand. We have these blue signs. You see them all around the city. This is just fine-tuning it and making it more detailed, creating a consistent brand and look and feel when you come into the lobby. They're cleaner, they're crisper, it's more natural. It affects your circadian rhythm. We want to have a better lighting, not a dim, dark, dingy, place to go do business. We want to invite people in, and I think it's not only about the lighting. Air conditioning and comfort control is very important. You don't want to go into a branch that the air conditioners were broke because they ran all night and the units burnt up, and then the sprinklers. Obviously, you don't want to go to a place where we have dead grass and flowers that don't look great, and because there's always someone across the street that competes, and you want to be better than that person. So I think for our customers, it's really our life's blood, and we really want to make sure that their experience with us, whether it's commercial or the retail side, is one of remembrance and that it's a place they enjoy coming. Our parking lots are clean, they're well striped, they're well lit at night in case there's a security factor. You got to walk across, you don't want it dark or the lights don't work. So there's a whole myriad of things, but I think in a nutshell, it's sort of what our thinking was, to create that overall pop and brand.
Great, thank you. Bruce, next question is for you. The question is, when Current first starts working with a customer, what's the first step you recommend for deploying an intelligent solution?
Probably as a very practical matter, it's how do we get intelligent together with the customer about what are their primary objectives, right? So Mike in the conversation today has made it pretty clear what Chase's objectives were, and then we would collaborate, and we could even expand those as we thought about additional opportunities with one another. But really, the first step is, do we understand sort of the pain points, the objectives? Are we focusing on cost out, right? At the same time, you want to drive sustainable solutions. But as a practical matter, if you sort of get into from a solution perspective, it often starts with, where are you in your journey for simple energy efficiency reduction through what we would call low-hanging fruit. The cost of LED and the payback periods are terrific, right? Look at what Mike has done across a whole variety of energy markets, right? States with different energy rates. It makes sense across the portfolio for him. And that we find consistently true. And so you can start the journey there. And while you're at it, why not also think about how you're actually turning that from just being a more energy efficient facility into being one that is actually capable of understanding what's happening in it, and then ultimately driving some insights and controls to actually change, right, and to improve it. And so, practically understanding the outcomes a customer wants, and then from a product standpoint, also looking and saying, how do you actually capture that low-hanging fruit from LED? If you've already done LED, there's plenty of additional optimization that can happen through software solutions on top, right? That's another place to start. We do have some customers that start way at the end on business productivity, who Mike brought the example up of space utilization, sort of space optimization. Are we using our space effectively? Are we deploying a big capital dollar in real estate effectively? And we find customers are like, hey, we have a constant drumbeat of a capital call year over year for expansion and so forth. Let's really understand how we're using our current space today to figure out whether we can better optimize that, year over year sort of spend.
Okay, wonderful. So the next question is a very practical question. I think both Bruce and Mike, you both could weigh in on this. The question is, how do you go about installing in so many bank branches? How do you handle that kind of scale?
Do you want to?
I can take that.
You want to get that one off?
Yeah, we have project managers and facility managers, and then we have vendors in these markets that are subbed out through the GE team, and we create very specific schedules, and we coordinate with our branch managers. And as Bruce may have alluded to very early on in this discussion, we get in there at night. We try to get it all kind of banged out in an evening, but we might have to go back and do a couple day two things. But we don't want to disrupt the business during the day. We don't want to disrupt our customers, and we just really want it to be seamless. And so these crews, are there, and we have very aggressive schedules, and we have very tight controls. We have calls every week. We go through them. We look at all of the kind of day two stuff. And, now that we're up over 3,000, we're almost done with this whole program. We had some lessons learned in the early going because it was such a big scale, but it was just some growing pains. We actually also put on top of all of that sort of a governance of inspectors. So we have kind of day three guys that go out and inspect the work and get up in ceilings and just make sure all the wiring's right and all the control points were done effectively. So we put a lot of thought and effort into this. This isn't sort of a gunslinger mentality. We went in and we really made, pertinent schedules that we could agree to, that we had the right service providers in those markets that could, take this on, and this is what we're doing. We did it with the lighting. We're now doing it with BMS, and we're doing it with solar. And I think once you kind of get that momentum going, it works pretty well.
Yep. I think probably the only thing I'd add is Mike's right. I mean, it's about having, proper milestones, proper resets, right? Whenever you're doing something of this scale, you have a lot of unique environments, right? The bank branches are not homogeneous. They're in lots of different sort of aged buildings, lots of different dynamics. And so you have to accommodate for those. And and along the way, you're like, okay, what's working, what's not working? And then let's take all those learnings and apply it going forward. And then apply a really strong rigor around the QC stuff. So it's all hands on deck, lots of of grinding, but we're finding that flywheel's moving nicely, as sort of Mike said. But we're always going to be learning, right? And that's actually the value of seeing a lot of it. You know, it's like you always want the practitioner that's doing more, right? That's seen a lot of things, right? Whether that's a surgeon or otherwise, because that does help. And I think that's some of the value that is accruing to both of our companies as a consequence.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We also pre-survey. We just don't show up at a branch and walk in the front door and say, okay, how many lights do we have? We know going in. There's a whole pre-survey. We know how many lights are going to be changed out. On the BMS, an interesting lesson learned was we did do a pilot, and we did about 10 branches in New Jersey and our market up there. And we thought we'd be in and out in one night, but what we found out is many of these branches had more circuits than we had anticipated, and they really weren't probably connected the way we had anticipated. So it ended up being more of a 2-night type of project. But we're okay with that because that was sort of like the lesson learned. We underwrote a night, but in many cases it's taking us about a night and a half, maybe 8 to 12, 14 hours, as opposed to just a straight 8, and we're in and out, and we bundle it up. So, but Bruce is right. Once the flywheel's going, we get pretty good at it, and you have the same leadership in those markets on the GE side, which this is their full-time job to coordinate and document and watch this. They really become proficient.
Great, thank you. So we've got a few more minutes for just a couple more questions. Mike, next question is for you. The question is, what were the greatest challenges to making this intelligent environment deployment happen?
Well, we are a big company. There's a lot of layers. There's a lot of different disciplines within JPMorgan, just like GE, like probably a lot of folks on the phone sit in big companies. It's really more of internal timing, getting people to the table, getting them to understand the thought process behind a vision of this magnitude. And I think, that was really the biggest, not so much of a struggle, but challenge, I think, in the sense that it wasn't like I own this company and I want to put in light bulbs in 5,000 branches and sign a piece of paper and they're off to the races. It took a lot of going back and forth, and there's a term we use here called build the deck. We built the deck, and then we built another deck, and then another one, and we just kept adding to it. And in the end, it felt like forever, but, it really didn't, probably take more than 6 months from the time we had the initial conversation. And then we signed the contract, and then we did our first branches. So, and now, when you get credibility, when we did the BMS, that was a much easier deck and a much easier conversation because people saw the power of the first phase of the program. And then when we did the purchase and power agreement, well, they saw the power of that. And then it just gets a little bit more easier because you're getting in front of the same leadership that now somewhat is comfortable with you, and you get to see how they look from an industrial logic standpoint. It's a bank. It's not a real estate company, so they think like bankers. They think on a numbers, in a shareholder value type of platform. So you have to put this in those kind of terms, and then it sells pretty good. And and I guess it's now 4 or 5 phases in, and we have the 2020 initiative, which is aggressive, but we're excited.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we're just about at 2 o'clock here, so we'll wrap up. As a reminder, we will send out a link to the recording of the presentation as well as a blog post recapping the questions asked. If you had asked a question that we didn't get to, we will have answers in that blog post. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you both Bruce and Mike for the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.